This is a pretty new thing for me, the audio essay, so you have to bear with me. But considering the massive scope of this game, I figured that actually scripting my thoughts might help me organize things a bit, so I hope you enjoy it. I also want to note that this is simply my first impressions, not a full review of the game. I'll probably reiterate throughout this video just how massive this game is, so we'll get to a full review much later down the line once I finished it. And I'm not the most well-spoken person. I'm also not an English scholar, so you'll have to forgive some of my grammar perhaps if it's not amazingly perfect, but I thought this would be a fun thing to try that's completely different. So, Elden Ring. Wow. We've all been waiting for years for this to come out, and I was even more excited this time than usual. The melding of my two favorite genres come together. If they manage to do this properly, it could be the ultimate game for me. Open world games are among my favorites when done really well, like Skyrim, Breath of the Wild, probably my personal favorite, Phoenix Rising. The feeling of exploration and adventure really resonates with me, and I really feel like I'm exploring this crafted world, and I can take things at my leisure, which is normally really, really slow. I enjoy soaking everything in, exploring every nook and cranny, and finding new secrets and surprises long after I thought I'd cleared an area. Then we have the Dark Souls genre, and yeah, I kind of consider Dark Souls its own genre. I mean, it really is, right, at this point? The action-adventure RPG kind of thing. But nothing was quite like Dark Souls when it came out, and it spawned a number of Dark Souls-like games afterwards. You know, like, cue up the memes about this is the blank of Dark Souls, right? So, but really, you can't deny how this game has influenced so many other games and developers. And I love that. Dark Souls just simply works for me. So, I first played Bloodborne back when it came out, and I had no clue what to expect. Of course, other than having my ass kicked, I fell in love not only with the Lovecraftian style of the game, but the gameplay style itself. I loved how difficult it was, and the sense of reward, satisfaction, progress when I finally cleared a boss or made my way through a very tough area. Bloodborne is another video for another time, but needless to say, it's one of my favorite games of all time, and it was really what hooked me into the Dark Souls world. And then, funny enough, I played Dark Souls 2 next, Scholar of the First Sin Edition, which is also another video for another time. There's a lot to say about that game, both bad and good. But that brought me into the Dark Souls world proper. It introduced me to the mechanics of bonfires and Estus, which were, while were present in Bloodborne in one form or another, they weren't really in their true Dark Souls glory. So Dark Souls 2 was a great experience because while it really cemented in my mind that these games were totally for me, and it was a very exciting thing to fall in love with a new style of game, it also introduced me to my love of this high fantasy style that this game's got going on. I've never really been into the whole idea of knights wielding great swords, dragons, castles, things like that. I enjoy them, but I'm not in love with them. And there's something about Dark Souls 2, though, walking around with a full set of armor, wielding the Zweihander, clashing with a big-ass dragon. I don't know, it was just an awesome experience and a genre that I really found that I enjoyed. So Dark Souls 3 solidified that. It brought that series to full circle, and I feel if Elden Ring did not exist, I'd tell you that Dark Souls 3 was the culmination of all the Souls games into one solid, cohesive work. And I certainly did feel that way despite the flaws I have with the game, but now we do have Elden Ring. It is real and here, and it is a very logical and clever and natural evolution of the series that takes all of the best things of the Souls games, tweaks them, and adds new mechanics that complement each other for one hell of an experience. So let me give you a short little review, recommendation, whatever you want to call it, before I get into this long first impressions rant. I'll give you this short recommendation, and then the rest of the video will have minor spoilers. I'll mention some things I've seen, mechanics, things like that. I won't really spoil the names of bosses, anything major. Keep in mind, though, I've played for about 10 hours, which, while that would be a sizable chunk of most games, I really feel like I've barely done anything in Elden Ring, and that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that I feel like I've made no progress. I'm just saying that it feels like I've just started to dip my toes into the water, and I'm very, very slowly wading over to the shallow end of the pool, if that makes sense. So, the short version, do I recommend Elden Ring? Hell yes. It has not only matched my expectations, which, let's be honest, like while everyone tries to manage expectations of games these days, they were still very high, and it's matched those expectations and it's exceeded them in ways I wasn't expecting or even thought possible, and that has made me very happy. And again, while I'm very early in the game, this is something very, very special. And if you've seen the myriad of 10 out of 10 review scores, while there's some discussion to be had there, there's some serious validity to them. This is really an incredible, beautiful experience. If you're a fan of Souls games, then I really think there's not much to worry about here. As I've said before, I think it's an excellent evolution of the series, and I think they push things further than they ever have. It's a much bigger leap than previous titles. If you're not a fan of open world games, if that's a genre that you really detest, then I think you will struggle with this, because I think it's not really a Dark Souls game in an open world setting. I think it's first and foremost an open world game with Dark Souls just plunked down into it. And if you've never played a Souls game, as it seems to be more the case this time for this one, owing to the bigger reach and excitement this game has had than previous titles, then I'm not sure. This game, for you, may be like my experience with Bloodborne. You may fall in love with the style and discover a new style of game to sink your teeth into, or you might find it too difficult, too overwhelming, and very cryptic, and you might not enjoy it. That's fine too. But overall, so far, it's a wonderful experience, and I highly recommend it. And though I have much more of the game to see, unless this game takes some sort of tremendous nosedive in quality, it's probably one of the best games I've ever played, and I really mean that. Okay, that's the short review. Let's get on to the long one. All right, remember, this is really just my first impressions with the game, but I have so many thoughts about it. And again, there are some minor spoilers here, enemies I've encountered, places I've been, weapons, things like that. I'll try to keep it very vague for the point of discussion. So I kept myself fairly blind on this game this time, actually. I wanted to know as little about it as possible, other than the fact that it was essentially an open world FromSoft game. I'd seen very minimal gameplay from trailers, like the first region that you start in. Very little gameplay. So my first thoughts with the game, it feels to me more like a natural evolution of Dark Souls 3. That is to say, this really feels like, at least at the very start of the game, that you could tell me this was Dark Souls 4 and I would believe you. I was unsure of what route they were going to go in. They could have kept going on the Sekiro route or done something completely different. To be honest, I was really hoping that they'd go more for the style of Dark Souls, though, because that's my favorite. I enjoyed Sekiro, but I didn't really love it. The samurai, like traditional Japanese style, is not my favorite, and that game didn't really click with me like the other ones have. I wanted the customization of Dark Souls and the dark, lonely, brooding fantasy aspects that I love so much. And pretty much right when I gained control of my character, I smiled. And if you know me, it takes a lot to make me smile. I'm smiling right now, of course, but I knew just from looking at the user interface on the screen that, yeah, this was going to be basically Dark Souls 4, or at least some evolution of that game. All right, so we're on the right path, right? I make my way through the tutorial area, the catacombs that you start the game in. Everything felt right. It felt great. And then there are some welcome surprises. So as I said, the Dark Souls style, the same type of user interface, the same welcome feel, but there are some nice additions here. So firstly, you have a jump button, which is pretty cool for Dark Souls. There's no more sprinting and then kind of pressing L3 or whatever. You can just jump freely. Now, Sekiro had that, of course, but it was just cool to see that it carried over into this style of game. I still think that Sekiro is quite a substantially different style. And by the way, if I mention Sekiro and refer to it, like it's really, truly because I feel that it's vastly different. I know it contains some of the main mechanics and it shares many similarities, but the overall playstyle felt very different to me. So we also now have the crouch mechanic from Sekiro, which I kind of liked. It carries over, and I thought the stealth mechanics of Sekiro were a little bit wonky at times. It sometimes did actually feel like a chore, so I didn't know how I felt about them including this. If it's something they were able to implement properly, I think it would just be an added layer of gameplay freedom and variation that I could actually see myself embracing. And then, of course, you're giving your Estus flask, and they really went with what we know here. It's now called the Flask of Crimson Tears, I believe, but it's literally just an Estus flask with a darker shade of red. You know, that's something that feels home to me. I love the Estus system. I loved it before. I love it here, so I was very happy to see that. We'll probably talk more on that later. And we also have the same souls system as before, basically. Now souls are called runes, which actually wasn't a big adjustment for me. I know when I played Dark Souls for the first time, I actually had a hell of a time not calling the souls blood echoes or calling the bonfires lanterns, which I know was probably an opposite issue for most people, but for some reason for me, and in Elden Ring, referring to them as runes in my head has been a pretty easy switch. And of course, we have Sites of Grace, which are our bonfires, and functionally are basically the same thing. Now, the opening area is this underground catacomb cave system. It was nice. It was a relatively short and sweet place. It introduced you to the basic mechanics of the game and the button mapping. You get a little mini boss to fight just to give you a kind of a taste of what's to come. The mini boss was extremely easy, but I think that's okay because I don't really think they wanted you getting stuck down here. I think they just wanted to let you know what you're dealing with, give you a good idea of what you need to know, and then let you loose to discover these things in more detail on your own. And I really also enjoyed that they started you essentially in the dark here. While this area isn't massive by any means, there's a few areas that are very, very dark, and that kind of almost clued me into the fact that torches might finally play an important role in this game, something that got me excited. I don't know why, but I love the idea of having to use a torch to light my way through an area. It just adds this layer of tension and excitement, and it makes me feel like I'm exploring uncharted territory or something. And Dark Souls 2 intended to use this mechanic, but we all know that we got basically a half-assed mechanic of that due to budget or time restraints, that weird timer system. And Dark Souls 3 didn't really utilize it in the way I wanted. It was there, but it not really utilized heavily. So now, this first area in the game, Limgrave, the first region, if you will, I've seen a little bit of this in the network test I mentioned. I didn't play the network test, of course, but I saw a few clips, very little here and there of people playing. But opening those doors for the first time, the light shining in your face, this big reveal of the first region, seeing that gargantuan tree in the background, the huge rolling hills, very quickly spotting the big boy enemy patrolling around. It was awesome. I mean, it was. It reminded me immediately of Breath of the Wild when you first exit the Shrine of Resurrection and you walk up the hill. You're treated to an expansive view of the overworld, and the camera takes over from you to pan cinematically over everything as that title pops up. It's like, hey, here's what you're getting into. Check it out. And I feel like this was Elden Ring's Breath of the Wild moment. It was quite a big contrast from the dark, closed-off feeling of the starting cave they put you in. And then, in true open-world fashion, that's that. You're free to go do whatever the hell you want. You do get a bit of guidance. There's an NPC right at the beginning that gives you some dialogue to point you in the right direction, and a really cool welcome mechanic. The Site of Grace actually points you to where you should go in the form of a beacon of light. Now, not all Sites of Grace do this, but I think in a game that is this massive and totally unrestrictive, coupled with Dark Souls' famous, cryptic storytelling guidance, I think this was a smart move. I thought, okay, I can go here if I want. That's the next place to go. But I can just tackle that when I'm ready. Just the fact that I knew where I should be going was a nice thing to see. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to get lost in the game, because as you'll quickly discover, the game is massive, and sometimes it does feel like you're not making progress or you're just totally lost. You'll be exploring, fighting enemies, getting items, but you'll kind of stop and say, yeah, this is great, but what am I actually supposed to be doing? And that's where I kind of remind myself that I'm playing a FromSoft game, and it's kind of just all part of the ride. Just really slow it down. Take your time. You'll figure out what you're supposed to do eventually. You'll come across someone or something eventually, but in the meantime, just enjoy it. And I really think that this ties into a big point I've noticed with this game, that they've really slowed things down tremendously, I think. They have crafted this meticulous, expansive world for you to discover, and they really want you to slow down, take your time, and have fun. Now, most of this comes down to the simple fact that it is an open world game. The time I would usually spend fighting and leveling my character up, getting new gear, that time has been spent exploring the area. But there are other things at play here, I feel. Enemies do not drop as many souls, or runes, excuse me. There are plenty of enemies to fight, right? But I don't think that they drop as many runes as before. Some enemies are seriously difficult, and the payoff is not really what you would expect. So at first I was kind of frustrated by this. I wanted to start leveling my character up and pumping points into strength and endurance. I want to go buy as many weapons as I could from all these traveling salesmen. But then I stopped and I thought about things in terms of an open world, like an exploration game. So, like, why rush it? Take your time. There are a lot of little, I think, behind the scenes things at work here in this game to slow you down. Case in point, the first mini boss, not the one in the cave, but the infamous horseback riding tree sentinel knight that you experience literally immediately after entering Limgrave for the first time. Now, naturally, you want to go up and check this dude out, because he is quite literally a stone's throw, or a rainbow stone, some meta joke there, from where you enter the level, right? But of course, in true Dark Souls fashion, he bodies you. I mean, this cat kills you instantly. So I fought him a few times, and while like normally I would fight like a difficult opening optional mini boss like this over and over and over until I beat him, I actually parked the brakes on this guy this time. I think that this like cat is a beginner's trap, almost like a teaching moment. He's clearly very overpowered for your puny, underleveled character, and he's sitting right here at the beginning for a reason. So mini bosses are optional in this game. They have been in the past. Like Sekiro had plenty of big samurai armored dudes at the ends of pathways and castles waiting to murder you at a moment's notice. But you could just choose to come back to them later, which I kind of liked that mechanic. And Elden Ring really is, for lack of a better word, mostly optional, though. So in my opinion, this mini-boss is here to say, look, you can't really fight this guy right now. If you come across something in this game and you find yourself having too hard of a time, then stop. Go somewhere else and come back whenever you feel like it. And there is really a heightened level of accessibility here that is very welcome to me. Certainly, if they just took the Dark Souls 3 formula and just transplanted it into this game, I would be satisfied. I think most of us would be. But there are a variety of options and tools at your disposal now that I think were actually necessary, but very appreciated, being that this is an open world. So now I'm let loose. It's time to explore. So I've watched a few reviews of this game, spoiler-free reviews. I just wanted to hear what some of my other fellow YouTubers' opinions were, without ruining anything. The one major thing that I keep hearing about this game is that it is really, really, really massive. It is overwhelmingly large, and there is so much to do that you find yourself finding things and saying to yourself, like, how did I miss that? And that's kind of what I wanted to hear, because I'm a fan of open world games, and exploration is the biggest draw for me. I love finding a new area, exploring it fully. I mean, spending hours exploring it, and then later on finding I missed aspects of that area. There's this like sense of adventure there that is so satisfying, and I think it only makes sense to combine it with the Dark Souls formula. And I mentioned before that I feel this is an open world game first and a Dark Souls game second, and if this was an okay open world game, that is to say that the map was, adequately designed, there were a good number of locations to explore and adventure through, I'd be a very happy man, right? But that's not really the case here. This is an extremely well-designed, expansive, and a ludicrously detailed open world. They went nuts. FromSoft have exceeded my expectations on this front, something that I did not think was going to happen. The lands between, from what I've experienced so far, is perhaps the greatest open world space I've ever had the pleasure to run around in, and I mean that sincerely. So there's a number of really good things going on here. So firstly, two of my favorite open world design aspects are included here, and they are implemented in this game with a very high level of artistry. The world has an immense sense of verticality, which is something that I very much love. Like Breath of the Wild offers gigantic cliffs to look up to, as if to say, how the hell am I going to get up there? Or there's deep chasms and swamps to look down at, as if to say, how the hell am I going to get down there? There's huge rolling hills, pits, swamps, forests. Everything is on display here. Like, okay, so as an aside, take a game like The Witcher 3, which, while I love, that game has relatively, comparatively flat environments that begin to actually feel samey after a while. And one of my first experiences in Elden Ring, other than looking out at the overworld and saying to myself, okay, yep, this is going to be one of those games where if I can see it, I can go to it. One of my first experiences was walking over just a few yards from the starting area and looking down, right down at the edge of the cliff of this seaside beach, which had to be probably like over 100 feet below me. And I just thought to myself, I want to go there. But then I had the thought, how the hell do I go there? And so that basically became my first mission, to find a way down to that beach to explore. And eventually I did, and there was so much to see and do down there. I found a merchant hanging out under a bridge, like a nice little safe spot. I found an entire cave system built into the cliff wall, complete with a whole mini boss. I found some horrible monstrosities hanging out near the shore that I was not even going to attempt to mess with because they were disgusting. And after that, I decided, you know what, I'm going to follow the guiding light of the Site of Grace, which led me to a church that, to me, felt like kind of like a temporary Firelink shrine. There were a few plot progression moments that happened there. I felt like I was progressing within the sense of the game, but I never really felt safe, so to speak. This church you go to is very broken down. It is exposed from all sides. There's no roof. You're not protected from the rain that falls periodically. And I enjoyed that. It was a sense of unease, as if to say, like, okay, you're safe here, but get your ass back out there. Don't stay here for too long. And here you get your horse, Torrent. And I have to say, I really enjoy the horse. So when I first heard that you would be getting a mount in this game, I think my first impression was that it would trivialize the exploration aspects of the game. Like, you would move too quickly through the environment. It would kill that wondrous feeling of exploration. But when you spend even just an hour or two with this game and you truly start to see how vast and dense and filled with things to do it is, you actually almost start wishing that your horse could move faster. So you call your horse through a key item you get, kind of like the game Immortals Fenyx Rising, if you've ever played that. It just materializes out of thin air when you need it, and it disappears when you dismount it. It's quick, smooth, it's very well thought out. Torrent can double jump, which looks pretty silly, but it's actually very useful for exploring, because remember, everything is very vertical in this game, which I very much like. Horseback combat is also a thing, and given your playstyle, it can actually, I think, can be a bit of an easy mode sort of band-aid thing if you need it. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Again, remember, there's many options here to make the game accessible to you without deviating from Dark Souls' famous difficulty. You can run in on Torrent, you can get a few swipes in on a big slow-moving enemy, and then you can just retreat much faster than you could possibly do on foot, right? Or rolling, whatever. I felt at first that horseback combat was actually a bit clunky. It is a little bit. You need to be very close to the enemy if you're using a sword, and it just kind of felt like we were both just flailing around like overcooked spaghetti, just like wildly taking swings at one another, hoping something would connect. But then I had my first good horseback fight, and it kind of clicked for me. And I was exploring an area that felt a little too difficult for me. I didn't want to really venture in too far. I didn't want to venture into too many areas for fear of like being overwhelmed because of how big the game is. So I retreated. And as a quick aside, you can fast travel in this game, which I think is awesome. But I do find myself frequently just manually venturing everywhere so I can explore and kind of learn the map better. But anyways, as I'm retreating back to the Site of Grace, this big armored knight enemy just comes out of nowhere and takes a swing at me. Now, this knight enemy is not nearly as powerful as the mini-boss that you encounter at the beginning of the game. But he's no slouch, though. So I decided, you know what? I'm just going to commit and fight this guy completely on horseback. And how epic it was, man, really. Firstly, it was nighttime. In one hand, I had my torch, which I haven't really talked about. The overworld isn't, like, prohibitively dark at night, but the torch does come into play in this game, as I hoped it would, namely in caves and, like, catacombs and stuff. So secondly, we're in the middle of a torrential downpour. The audio is excellent. I just really felt like I was in the middle of this crazy world, like in the thick of things, right? So I start fighting him on this steep hill, mind you, and I'm starting to really enjoy this. And then I remember Oh, yeah. The hill that I'm on right now is being struck by lightning every 5 seconds. So I'm running around on my horse. I'm swinging in to attack this knight. All the while, I am dodging giant, ferocious blasts of lightning in a rainstorm. And I killed him, trekked down the hill, and sat down at the site of grace. And the best part about that fight is it was unscripted. I mean, the guy is always going to be there, but this wasn't like a scripted boss encounter. It was just a thing that happened, right? It didn't have to take place in that area. It was just a thing that happened while exploring, and it can happen again, though it's probably not going to happen exactly the same way. And that really ties into the exploration aspect of this game, that in addition to finding really, really cool, seriously expertly crafted areas and secrets, you're just going to see awesome, almost like set piece sort of things that are happening in the overworld that are not really scripted. Like scripted to a degree where it's always going to occur, but the fight will never play out the same way. So here's another example. I was venturing around a cliff I had explored a bit before, and of course I discovered more than I had previously. I missed some stuff, and around this corner, out of nowhere, comes this big-ass carriage being pulled by two 15-foot trolls. I just kind of laughed. Right. Another time I ventured into this mist-shrouded forest that I also had somehow missed while exploring, and I fought off a huge grizzly bear. It was awesome. It wasn't a super difficult fight, but it was satisfying to fight, nonetheless. Then, around the corner, another grizzly bear sleeping that was probably 6 times the size, like a 20,000-pound, 15-foot tall grizzly bear. Right? I'm thinking, holy shit. Then I look to my left. Another one of those giant bears. And then another. And then another. One of them was standing on its hind legs, scratching a tree, sharpening its claws. I'm just thinking, like, how the hell did I miss this? And that's where this sense of scale really comes into play. I've heard other reviewers mention this, and I've mentioned this probably a few times already, but probably. The just gigantic sense of scope that this game has, but I really cannot overstate it. You have to remember, I'm 10 hours into this game, and I've just barely scouted out the opening area. This game is huge. This game is fucking gigantic. If this entire game was just this opening section of Limgrave, I would be satisfied, because it is literally the size of an entire game. That's just the opening area, all right? A couple times I've gone to re-explore an area only to find that there was another completely explorable section that I've missed. And that section I went to led to another section, which led to another section, which then, before you know it, leads to a literal new region of the map. And it's like, how could I have missed that? And I think that this game is very cleverly designed with verticality in mind to hide these areas from you. This huge sprawling area of the game might be hidden from your view behind a large mountain, and it is up to you to go there and discover it. And it is funny because I'm trying to stay spoiler free, but here and there I've seen a few people say things like, how do I do XYZ in this place? Or how do I do this in this castle? Or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself a little bit like, oh, I feel like they're moving through the game so quickly, slow down and enjoy it, play it the way you want, but oh geez, I wouldn't go that fast. I would really savor it, only to discover that the areas that they're talking about were in the opening section, and I missed them. It's that sense of scale and discovery that I have mentioned over and over again already that cannot be overstated again, and it is really the magic of this game. Now, I am sure that I'm missing a lot, all right? I haven't talked about the crafting system or the weapon or armor in detail, the new weapon art system, which is called Ashes of War. There is a lot to check out here and explore. There is a lot to sink your teeth into. They give you many options. If you don't want something to make it too easy, you don't have to do it. If you want an easier time, that option is there. But the game can be overwhelming. And I've said, as much as I love exploration, occasionally I do lose a sense of purpose. Like I'm just exploring, but I'm exploring for the sake of exploring. What am I actually doing? But the game does subtly point you in the right direction if you want to continue the story by the Sights of Grace. And after all, if you really don't know what you should do, just pick a direction and go off and explore. And if you have been in that direction already, go there again anyways, and you'll find something new. You will. And I can't believe how encompassing this game is in just the first region. I cannot get enough of it. But I know that there's much, much more to see. There are more varied environments. Not everything is probably going to look like a forest in this game. There are more enemies, NPCs. It's really outstanding. And I've made my thoughts sufficiently clear on this game, but it has exceeded my expectations, and I'm very, very happy. Before I go into this final part, I do actually want to make this as an aside. I am doing this I'm speaking to unscripted candidly right now. The rest of this has been completely scripted, word for word, from a script, because I thought it would be a new fun thing to do. I do want to say, I guess it's a little silly, but I mentioned that I had played 10 hours. I'm 30 hours into the game now, for real. I'm literally 30 hours into the game. I thought that I would just do this first impressions based on my 10 hours experience. The 30 hours experience, I haven't... Okay, so that's 20 extra hours. That's like a full game right there. I haven't really explored any more than I have right now. That's how big this game is. I have not really unlocked any new regions. I haven't really got any new maps. I'm still in the same area, dude. I'm still going around exploring, and I just cannot believe that I'm uncovering new things. I have killed more bosses, of course. I've upgraded my character a little bit. But in terms of exploring the region, I'm still in the same spot. So I just wanted to point that out there to let you know that realistically I'm 30 hours into the game. A little bit further, but not too much further. But I did want to make this based on my experience at the time because I still think it holds true. So let us get into some of my issues with the game. Okay, well, nothing is perfect, right? There are definitely some issues here. None of these issues ruin the game, all right? None of the issues that this game has make it where it is a unplayable experience, but it makes it very flawed, substantially flawed. It's still an unbelievably good fucking game, right? But there are some major issues I feel that need to be addressed, and some minor ones as well. I should mention that I am playing on Xbox Series S, not the X, and it's not the biggest, beefiest console around. It's still a next-gen console. Regardless of what I'm playing on, though, I feel like the game should be a relatively smooth experience. Online play on the Xbox Series S was non-functional for a number of days. It is fixed, I believe, now, but it was completely broken. Now, they did fix it, right? So that's good, but I don't know. It's something that's not a problem anymore, and I should move on from it, but it was completely non-functional at launch for a few days, and I don't think they really even acknowledged it. It's just something that rubs me the wrong way, and if you're somebody that does play the game online totally, I don't, but if you are, then it could have been a very bad launch for you. So I'm glad they fixed it. I don't like the way they went about it, though. Next issue is camera. And this is something that is annoying at best and very, very frustrating at worst. I feel like camera has always been an issue in FromSoft games, but I feel actually for some reason that it's worse in this game. I'm sure we're all aware of auto wall recovery. It's an option that we always turn off. It's when the camera basically pushes against a wall. It tries to divert away from that wall to correct your vision, but it changes the direction that your character is moving, which normally results in you falling to your death off of a rafter or a cliff or something. This can be turned off, of course, but the actual general user camera has issues too. There's like this automatic recenter camera that very gently tries to correct itself back behind your character, like it tries to recenter itself. And when I'm moving around in the overworld, I want to look in one direction while I'm moving in another. Maybe there's an enemy that I need to be on the lookout for, or I just want to scope another area out in the distance while I'm traveling on torrent in another. And this is very challenging when the camera is fighting against you, trying to recenter itself, pushing away from where you're looking. To my knowledge, there's no way to fix this, like to lock it to a truly manual camera, and that's very frustrating to me. It's not a game breaker, but it's a big, big annoyance that easily could have been fixed, and I sincerely hope they patch this. And another, I guess, minor issue, I'm noticing, again, on Xbox, I'm noticing a touch of input lag. I don't notice it a ton with attacks, but when I'm jumping and sprinting, there is, I wouldn't say extreme, but there is a noticeable input lag that is a bit jarring to me. I'm not sure what's causing it, and it is minimal, but it's an annoyance nonetheless. Okay, now let's talk about the big issue. You probably know what it is, and that is performance. I am sure that you've seen PC performance talked about on every far-reaching corner of the internet. Micro stutters, frame drops, pop-in, things like that. The game is, in my opinion, technically unstable on PC regardless of the power of your rig. There are people with $5,000 computers that are having the same issues. This has been acknowledged by the developers and it is being worked on, because how the hell couldn't it be? What is being talked about far less, perhaps not even at all really, I've seen it mentioned in like a couple of Reddit threads, but not really mentioned, is performance on console, specifically on Xbox in my case. And I've heard actually that the performance on console is better than PC performance, and that is honestly shocking to me. Obviously, you would expect PC performance to be better, but Xbox performance is, for lack of a better word, poor. This is all my opinion, of course. You could have a totally different feel, but I'm not really a graphics or a frame rate person, really. I mean, I guess I normally choose a frame rate option when it's available. I'll sacrifice the pretty visuals so that it's smooth, but I don't have a problem playing a 30 frames per second game. I don't, as long as it is locked to that frame rate. Obviously 60, or even now that I have my third eye is opened and I've come to discover 120 frames per second, which I used to scoff at. No, I get it now. I get it. It obviously looks smoother. But if I play a game that is locked to 30 for hours and hours, especially a game as long as this, I have no problem. Frame rate on the Xbox Series S and the Series X, I hear for that matter, is wildly, wildly inconsistent. Now, it has dropped below 30. That's obviously like the bad thing, right? We don't want that to happen. That's bad. It has very few times. I will at least give it that. I don't think it's acceptable, but I think that it's not like Breath of the Wild levels of frame rate drops where it's running at like 20 frames per second. And like you go in the forest and the whole forest is running at like 15 FPS. That's not happening here. It has dropped below 30 though. I can tell when it is. Very rarely though. That's definitely a limit for me. I won't accept that. But there is an uncapped frame rate here. And that uncapped frame rate just jumps around at a constant pace. And that is honestly a freaking headache to look at and to play through. There is also a quality mode that on the Series S renders at 1440p. And a frame rate mode that uses a variable resolution. So the Series S, of course, is not the absolute prettiest way to play this game. But if I can play this game at 1440p, I have Dolby Vision HDR. It's a crispy resolution. The game is pretty beautiful. It's not the best looking game, but it is beautiful. Both of these modes, though, have an uncapped frame rate, leading to this discomfort and disorientation that I've mentioned. And why they have decided not to cap quality mode at 30 frames per second, I don't know. I feel like it's a poor decision, but I don't know. I would much rather take a stable 30 frames per second than a frame rate that is changing quite literally every 2 seconds. I'm not exaggerating. Now on quality mode, sometimes the game actually runs near 60 frames per second when my character is just standing still. And then when I start moving, it drops down to 40. Then it goes up to 50 and then back down to 30. And it just looks stuttery and broken. And sometimes it looks amateurish actually. And it's a huge distraction from the gameplay flow. It doesn't like get me killed or anything, but it just distracts your enjoyment and the sitting there and zoning out on Elden Ring. I get taken out of the game world by this gameplay performance. It's disruptive in a game like this. And there have been a few times where these precise movements have been faltered by the performance. Very rarely does it like get me killed, like I said, but it's still distracting. Now, frame rate mode, which I would normally choose, I'm going to be honest with you, and I think many people would disagree, but this is just how I feel. I think this is worse, in my opinion. So this mode, again, is an uncapped frame rate. So while the overall frame rate is higher, honestly not that much higher, it's not like you would expect, oh, a 30 and then a 60. It's like a couple frames higher. It still jumps around with the same level of frequency that the quality mode does. So my eyes never really adjust to the frame rate, and it never feels like I'm playing a frame rate mode. This level of disorientation is about the same. Now, on frame rate mode, however, the game utilizes variable resolution. So sometimes it is rendering at 1440p. Sometimes it drops to 1080p. Sometimes it drops below 1080p, and the game looks very, very blurry. And it does this very frequently as well. So you have a blurry image, then a clean image, then a blurry one again. So now, on top of having to have your eyes try to adjust to a dancing frame rate, you also have to adjust to a changing resolution. And that is, to me, at least to my sensibilities, like double the frustration. So I personally recommend, at the moment, quality mode. I know that's heresy to most people. The game actually selects performance mode by default, but I would rather have one changing thing than two. That's just me. This performance is by far the biggest issue, and it's not ruining the game. Like I said, I think I've made it perfectly clear. I think the game is fucking phenomenal, but is legitimately distracting, and it is making it harder for me to enjoy the game that it should be. Total, like, random aside, like, it's almost like if you were given a new Lamborghini free of charge. Someone just said, you can just have this Lamborghini, like this beautiful sports car. But inside the car, it smells like rotten eggs. And you can't get rid of it. It's like, yeah, the car is awesome, and it drives awesome, and it's fast as fuck. But the car smells like rotten eggs every time I get in it. That's what this feels like to me. I don't personally think that they've really addressed the console performance, because clearly their concern right now is with the PC issues. Some people said they addressed it. I've read statements they've posted. I feel like the wording is a little unclear. I have this horrible feeling that they're just not going to ever really fix it. They're just it's going to be one of those, this is what you're getting kind of things. A lot of people are saying, how could they possibly not address this? They'll obviously fix this in a patch. It's that patch thing. Like, patches are like the gift from God that fixes everything. It's never really the case. FromSoft themselves have a history of not ever really fixing things totally, and while Elden Ring definitely has reached a wider scope of people than ever before, I still feel like I have this horrible feeling that they're just going to fix the PC performance and call it a day. And that PC performance fix may or may not even happen. I'm not a game developer. There could be something fundamentally wrong with the game under the hood. It could take them weeks to fix it, or they could go one step forward, two steps back. I'd like to be positive about that, but I have seen this happen before. I've played my fair share of games. I've played my fair share of FromSoft games, and I find more often than not, it does not work out the way I want to. So I'll say this. Performance is not unplayable, but it is distracting, and it's at a level that I don't think is acceptable. If they do not fix the performance ever on Xbox, and it maintains this level of wonkiness, this game will have several points taken off from me. It will fail to achieve that excellence in my mind. Maybe that seems dramatic, but I am playing a game. I'm not watching a film. And there are technical aspects of the input into the game and my overall performance in the game that is a huge factor in my enjoyment. And I think that there is an acceptable level of performance across the bar that we should strive for and we should hold people accountable for. And I don't want to turn this into that kind of rant, but it is true that if other companies were to put out games with this level of performance, there would be quite an uproar. That does say something about the quality of game that From can put out, that they can make a game this exceptional, and people will really cut them slack on performance. But still, to me, it is a big deal, and it's something that should be talked about. So playing this game on PlayStation 5, many people have suggested to play the PS4 version of this game on PlayStation 5, which will offer a locked 60 frames per second at a lower resolution. Now, that's certainly a fix, but that's frankly fucking ridiculous, right? Nobody should have to do that. You should not have to do some stuff like that, right? Especially on a new console. Pop-in is also an issue in this game, I have to say. It's not laughably terrible, but I've had enemies pop in here and there. Trees, rocks, grass, they pop in constantly. So that's not like the biggest thing, but I would like to see that fixed along with, frankly, terrible shadow mapping. I think that they've basically turned the shadows in this game on the Xbox version down to ultra low. They can look horribly bad at times, like glitchy bad, to where they look like it's a glitch. Sometimes they just look frankly bad. Sometimes they look okay, but that's something I would hope they fix. Maybe they won't, they probably won't, but that comes after performance. I know it's a little dramatic. I don't want to turn you off from the game, but it is an issue that should be addressed and talked about until it's acknowledged or fixed. So I want to end on a high note because this is a great game. I suggest giving this game a shot if you've never played a Souls game before, because I really do think that there are a lot of things in this game that make it accessible to more players, but without sacrificing their core values of what makes Dark Souls special. It's not going to be a walk in the park. It is not for everybody. But for returning fans, they have flipped the formula on its head while still keeping everything that we love and cherish about these games. And they have evolved this series so far past what I thought with just this one game. It's almost like they have truly created the ultimate Souls game that we have always wanted. It's almost like they have created the fan game. People modded these games. They do all these crazy things. It's like they said, we're just going to do it. We're going to actually give you what you want. And they feel like they did that. That's it. Thanks for listening to this long rant, rambling